back to the Roker Rapport in association with RokerReport.com. This is actually the 50th episode of the podcast, so there's a big thank you to our audience from all of us at the Rapport for listening to us for the last 12 months. And here's to another 50 episodes. Lots happened since we last spoke to you before the international break. Sunderland have drawn a game 2-2 with Millwall, so we'll talk a little bit about that. It's not terribly relevant now. But that was under caretaker manager Robbie Stockdale. Of course, the real news is that Chris Coleman, former Wales manager, has decided to drink from that poison chalice that is Sunderland AFC. So we've got him for another 2.5 years from the sounds of it, on a £750,000 a year contract. Good for him. Good guy. Unfortunately, his managerial reign began today, essentially, with a disappointment. 2-1 loss at Villa Park to Aston Villa. So we'll be chatting about all that. And to help me through it, I'm joined by some Roker Report writers. Jimmy Lowson, how you doing, buddy?
Yeah, very well. Very well. Glad to make my return on the big 50th episode. Should be fun.
Yeah. It's the extravaganza. I've got a little drink, but I've always got a little drink on. And we've also got James Nichols. How you doing, buddy?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. I'm good. Glad to be here. My birthday today, actually.
Nice. Your birthday day, is it? Fantastic. Nice. Look at that. Yes. Celebrating it in style on the podcast with the lads. Unfortunately, Sunderland didn't do you too many favours on your birthday. Jimmy Lowson, my friend, a quick rundown of your thoughts on the game today. The somewhat disappointing 2-1 loss. Seemed like we could have got a lot more out of that. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I felt it was a real sort of mixed bag from Sunderland today. I mean, we sort of knocked it about with much more confidence. There was a marked difference in terms of the way we played football from what we've been used to this season with Grayson and his sort of emphasis on direct football, and Coleman trying to get us to play football and trying to get us to make something happen. The one disappointing thing is we had so much possession, we had so much the ball, and yet there was never really that end product. I mean, I did the match report for the game, and I think there was maybe 3 goal scoring chances that I actually bothered to write about from Sunderland. And that's the one disappointment, that we saw some progress, we saw some better football, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it was another disappointing defeat. It was another defeat where at times we looked a bit sketchy at the back, where at times we were the second best team, I felt as if, towards the end of the first half and the start of the second. So we had our moments, we played really well at times, but there just wasn't enough end product. But the signs are promising. It looks as if we're going to be better under Coleman. If we are going to go down, we're going to go down playing more exciting football. So it was a promising start. It's just very frustrating that we didn't win the game or get anything out of the game. And the other frustrating thing is, there was a clear foul in the build-up to the first goal, which was just absolutely absurd. I mean, Samba's wiped out Matthews, and that should never happen. And then the second goal is a deflected goal as well. So when things aren't going for us, when we are playing well away from home against a good team and trying to hold our own, we don't even get the luck. So, I mean, plenty of positives. Coleman's going to get us playing football in a different way, a more exciting way. It's just ultimately frustrating that it's another loss and it's another game gone.
That is the real tragedy of this, I suppose. We started it so well. Well, the opening 20 minutes, 30 minutes, we were discussing it as always in the chat, and it was plain to see that there was a lot more, not determination, because they've showed determination many times during this season, if without any end product. It wasn't determination, it was more of a concentration. But it certainly seemed like, particularly to go down, I mean, the second goal for me, that was unfair. It was harsh. It took a huge deflection. As you say, the first goal, there was a build-up. It's debatable, but a foul in that build-up to that. Regardless of that, I think, as I say, we played really well up until we conceded the second goal. After that, it just seemed to be a lot of deflation. There was a good 10, 15 minutes with the players kicking around, having lost their recent vigour, their recently found vigour. But still, as you say, there are a lot of positives to take from that. I would take a few, certainly. James, what do you think of the game, man?
It's not a great result. I mean, if we could have got a goal near the end and got the draw, it would have been great to come away from Villa Park. But look, Villa are 5th in the table, and they're 5th for a reason. They're an effective team. They've got a good system with some good players. Look at their lineup today, and their lineup was quite daunting at the start. And I think we're missing 6 first-team players. Because the way we played today, we set ourselves up completely differently and played in a different style under Grayson. I've hated the way we've played football under Grayson. It's been long ball, hoof balls up. It's been just constantly looking over the heads. The players are always looking over the shoulder. And there isn't any time you've seen players moving into space, dictating play, cutting in between, playing 1-2s, having the ability to play the ball short and actually keep the ball. And today we're seeing that for the first time, arguably this season, or maybe even longer. And it's only been a couple of days into Coleman's reign. And if we're already doing that, that shows that not necessarily maybe him himself has only been in there for 48 hours. it's partly managerial impact, but it's also that you could just plainly see that under Grayson, we're playing the wrong style of football. These players aren't players that are going to succeed under a direct or long ball style. I've got nothing wrong with a direct or long ball style, but it just doesn't work for the players that we have. And this particularly played to the strengths of Lewis Grabban, who I thought had a very good game today.
Yep, I think James is really keyed in on the key point here, and that is that we really, really have to sort of play to our strengths now. Sort of, if you were to list Sunderland's best sort of half dozen players, with the exception of maybe Didier and Dong, they're all attack-minded players. And if we've now got a manager in Chris Coleman, who showed with Wales that he can bring the best out of the players he's got, that he's capable of playing to the strengths of his best attacking players, and we can see more of Grabban in games, more of McGeady in games, that's really going to be the way we get out of trouble. I mean, we've got a soft centre. I think we're going to have a soft centre all season. It would take some minor miracle work in to solve our issues in defensive midfield, our issues at centre-back, our issues at goalkeeper, obviously, between now and the end of the season. But if Chris Coleman can maybe, get us playing through Grabban more, get us playing to his strengths more, get us getting McGeady into games more regularly. I know he's a bit up and down today, but that's really going to make us more exciting to watch. And if we do go down, at least we're going to go down playing good football. So I think that's a real positive from today, that already we're seeing the impact that Chris Coleman can have off the back of maybe 1-2 training sessions. So although the performance was patchy, at times we held on to the ball a bit too long, at times we didn't play quickly enough, we're already seeing some really good things with Coleman. And it's really great to sort of come away from a game against, like James said, one of the best teams in the league, and see Sunderland actually compete and hold our own. So there were a lot of positives today.
Yeah, it was that soft centre it's been a big problem for us all season. But today it seemed slightly different. Now, George Honeyman and Lyndon Gooch, I thought, played just slightly advanced to Dan Gibson in like a 4-3-3 sort of role. And the two of them kind of done his work for him at times. Gibson was much more withdrawn. He didn't have to do as much running as he has to have done alongside Cattermole, especially against Middlesbrough. He was having to huff and puff all the way up and down the pitch. And Gibson, he's injury prone and on the wrong side of 30. Playing those two there with Honeyman and Gooch, they done a lot of the running and a lot of the pressing for Gibson. And they're both terriers. They both fight. They both work very hard in the middle. And I thought that three actually worked very well. And I'm arguably one of Gibson's biggest critics, but I thought he had a good game today. George Honeyman, I'm not so sure. He was good. He worked very hard. But
this is it. I'm not sure he was good. I mean, he has had some good performances for us today. I think it's fair to say that he's lacking. I mean, considering how many people have come through our academy system now, like people like Pickford, Gooch, Watmore. Obviously, we'll talk about Watmore shortly because apparently some harsh news on him, injured, out for a long time, which kind of sucks. But yeah, out of all of those, considering those that have come into the senior squad, who have had chances with the first team, I mean, Honeyman has to be one of the bigger question marks. You know, surely there has to be a bigger question mark over Honeyman, whether his contribution, not necessarily because of him, but perhaps because of his style of play, whether that's actually beneficial as much as, say, Gooch, who, although playing in a slightly different position, is more aggressive, more combative. These sort of things, they should be taken into account when you look at our developing players. I think if we had fewer well-developed academy players, which, as I say, I think we do have a lot of. I think they have more opportunities than most, certainly, and they have a lot more of an endearing fan base amongst the fans of the first team who might not necessarily follow the under-23s or anything like that in any other team because of our constant merry-go-round of managers. You know, they're always on display, aren't they? They're always in the shop window.
James made a good point on Honeyman in terms of that he did do an important role off the ball. He was an absolute terrier tonight. He did work really hard. But there were times where I was looking and thinking, when are we going to create a chance? When are we going to make that killer pass? And he was as guilty as anyone really of really ending attacks. Attacks ended when the ball came to him. He wasn't able to play the ball, to play in Matthews. He wasn't able to pick out that killer pass that got Grabban away. And you could say that's fine. We're away at Villa. That's fine. You want that sort of robustness. You want that energy and that work rate. But it's a bit of a shame that Williams wasn't available and we maybe didn't have that number 10. You could have switched Honeyman for when we were chasing the game, because I do think he played well. I do think that James's point's correct about Gibson sort of having the space to pass because he had other people doing his running for him. But it's quite interesting with Honeyman that he played well in ways, but then at times he was patchy and he was a bit up and down, a bit inconsistent. Gooch, on the other hand, I think there's talent there. I mean, he played one inch perfect pass to Brian Oviedo. It was really good in the first half. And then he also had that ball over the top to Graben. And he's shown us flashes of his ability. Like, I mean, I know he's given away the ball a lot. I know he's struggled with Grayson's hoofball a bit, but there's something there. So I think Gooch is an exciting prospect. Honeyman, really, you're looking at him as a squad player, I think, still. And I think that's something we've talked about a lot on this pod.
I think I definitely agree with Lyndon Gooch. I'm a big fan of Gooch's, actually. And that's going to get quoted afterwards. But
it won't. I think you're only like the millionth person to make that. I don't think we have 1 million fans. So,
but he is a very, very technically skilled player, I think, with Lyndon Gooch. Honeyman, on the other hand, I think, was frustrating tonight. He gave a ball away so often and finished so many of our attacks. Yeah, I remember watching George Honeyman for the under-23s, and he was the focal point for everything. He played in the number 10 role, and everything the under-23s have done well over the last couple of years when he was in the team, it came through him. So when it was Mika Mandron up front, everything that came to Mandron went through Honeyman at some point. He played as the number 10, coming short for the ball, receiving it, recycling it in dangerous positions, and getting the odd goal himself. He looks a completely different player. He still has the terrier-like work rate that he had for an under-23s, but he just hasn't developed for the first team in the same way that he could control and dictate games for the under-23s.
In that sense, I agree with you. Like, while they've had many opportunities to display themselves, or display their qualities to the new manager or the new managerial team or whatever, over recent years, it's still difficult to do that, isn't it? Given the pressures that are put on players when they walk into the dressing room, there's a lot of factors that go into being a professional footballer. And obviously, there's a lot of psychology which is ignored in most mainstream media. They tend to ignore it unless it's a documentary on BBC. People don't tend to care about the inner workings of the football mind, and there are huge pressures on them and things like that you can look at and say, oh, well, he's being paid, I don't know, 10 grand a week to do this. I assume that's something like what Gooch is on. He should just get over it. It's very difficult to do that, isn't it? So obviously in a situation where we look at it and go, well, that wouldn't faze me, or that wouldn't be something that would display itself on the pitch. That's something that happens quite evidently. So when it comes to these young players coming into a situation like Sunderland, like playing for the first team, well, it's easy to turn around and say, oh, well, they've got many opportunities. At the same time, on the other side of that coin, they've got huge pressure, not just to perform for their manager, but to actually step into a dressing room that's already, it's already depressed for the fact that it's been relegated or whatever. That must be doubly hard. So I think you've got to admire the mental constitution of players like Gooch, even Honeyman, regardless of whether he had a good performance today or not, who come into it and still manage to sort of thrive in that atmosphere.
The one thing I think that maybe Honeyman's missing, like as somebody who didn't watch him a lot coming through, who sort of was exposed to him for the first time last year when he sort of came on at West Brom and when he was brought into the side that was struggling under Moyes, is I think he lacks that X factor, whether it's sort of the power to have a powerful shot, whether it's the athleticism to go away from someone at this level. I just think he's missing maybe that one thing he's special at. Like, he's good technically, he's got good feet. But I feel as if maybe to stick out at this level and to excel at this level, he's just lacking that one thing that you think, oh yeah, that's what George Honeyman's really good at. He's got that great shot on him that people need to respect. Or, oh yeah, George Honeyman, the way he goes past players, that's what they've really got to respect. Or maybe sort of like he doesn't quite have the trickery of McGeady. I just feel as if he's maybe one of these players. He just isn't quite at that level.
Yeah, definitely agree on Honeyman there. He's good, but he's got a lot of aspects that are against him in his game, unfortunately, because of the nature of his game. I remember watching a documentary on the club on American TV, and Gooch was actually being interviewed, and he mentioned something in the academy is an old school academy that they make them wash all the dressing rooms, to keep them grounded. And that's part of the psychology. That's part of what I think is good that the academy do bring in. If you're discussing the Sunderland Academy and more so English Academy with René Maric, who writes for Spielverlagerung, and he's the assistant coach of Red Bull Salzburg now in Austria. And he heavily reprimands English Academy football for focusing too much on individual technical ability and not on team technical ability. So he basically says that they focus too much on, say, like letting them have just free kick practice over and all, instead of team drills, which, although doesn't really show in Honeyman's performance tonight because on the ball he was actually quite poor. But if you look at one of his problems, that he doesn't really have spatial awareness, great spatial awareness. He's never really looking over his shoulder. And because of that, it makes him look smaller, slower and weaker than he actually is. because he's never really in the space that he should always be in. According to Rene, that's a problem with the academy, but I can see it in Honeyman.
That's an interesting point. Having said that, considering that most managers seem to, not just managers, but anyone who seems to visit the facilities of Sunderland AFC, they're not at all scathing about it. They're very complimentary. So from all accounts, in my mind, I know we're not having necessarily the best success with the under-23s at the moment, but we did have. It seems like we were having a lot of success with the under-23s not so long ago, 18 months ago, for example. I'm not sure if that was because of the change-ups in the dressing room or anything like that. Okay, yeah, so we've been chatting a lot about the Aston Villa game, which is, it's neither here nor there really, I suppose, a moot point. Talking about Chris Coleman, really, this is his first game in charge of Sunderland. Obviously, he sent his assistant, Simmons, to watch us in the last match we played under Robbie Stockdale, though. So now he's had a little bit of time to take a look at his squad. He's had a little bit of time to perhaps implement one or two philosophies, or the idea of philosophy, certainly not enough time to actually implement them properly or get them adhering to them, but certainly a chance to tell everyone how he is and how he acts as a manager. Also, his interview did very well in my eyes. I'm going to put it to you guys, though. Jimmy, what did you make of Coleman's interview, first of all, and afterwards, I don't know, his actions, I suppose, tonight, the timing of the substitutions, the team selection?
Well, that was the crazy thing about tonight for me, was just how much of an impact we saw that he'd had already in terms of playing style, how sort of alien it was to what we've seen before with Grayson and Moyes. I couldn't believe how different we looked after one or two training sessions, like I mentioned before. And yeah, it's all been really positive. I mean, I couldn't believe it on Friday night when I saw that he was coming. I could not believe that he's willing to give up the post in Wales, the potential of jumping in at a Premier League job, so many other options. I mean, it's just a real plus, definitely. I mean, I'm very impressed with what I've seen so far. My first choice would have been Paul Heckingbottom. I think if we'd gone for him, there's more of an element of risk in terms of how good he actually is, but I think there's more potential us setting ourselves up with a manager who could be more shrewd in terms of the transfers he could make, who could potentially be with us even if we did go down to League One. And that was potentially the long-term punt that I would have liked to seen us take. But everything about Coleman's impressive. I think that he's a much better manager now than he was when he was at Coventry and Fulham. I think he doesn't get anywhere near enough credit for what he did with Wales last summer. I think people are way too quick to dismiss that. Okay, without Gareth Bale, he doesn't get there, but he still set that team up in a system where both Bale and Ramsey could flourish. So it's all very promising. I think ultimately he's a much better coach than Grayson. Whether he falls down or succeeds here is going to depend on what he can do in the transfer window. And that's the big unknown. I mean, I assume everyone who's listened to this podcast read Callum's piece over the weekend on our infrastructure, on Martin Bain's long-term plan. And that's the big worry, is that he's coming into a club that is so disorganized, that's so lacking in terms of infrastructure. If he wants to be successful here, he has to do the job of about 3 men. And that's the big challenge. But in terms of a coach, he's about as good as what we could have got. We've already seen that tonight. So it's all very positive, really.
Yeah, definitely. Coleman's got a big job on his hands. But every single coach that's been successful at Sunderland, they've had a big character. You've had to have a big character to be a good Sunderland manager. If you go back in, the last successful one we had was Allardyce, and he got the England job on the back of being successful here. Grayson just didn't have the character. He didn't have the personality for the job. Even from the start, he looked a little bit out of his depth. Whereas Coleman, with his experience, with the way that he's handled the Wales job, being named the 45th best coach in the world, and then the best British coach in the world by L'Equipe, a notoriously harsh French newspaper, he's arguably too good of a manager for us, for the state that we're in right now and what we deserve right now. And I don't want to be blowing his trumpet too much too early, but I'm very optimistic about Coleman in charge. And I've done a Q&A with Ben Dudley of the Supporters and Customers site just after the announcement, and he even predicted that there won't be a short-term fix with Coleman, but there will be a long-term vision. He said he even predicted we'll finish 12th this season and get into the playoffs next year. And that's from a lifelong Wales fan who went to every single game under Coleman and actually wanted him sacked at one point after the 6-1 defeat.
Yeah, it's easy to see that he's perhaps better than we could have expected. I mean, Jimmy said something there about, well, he would have preferred Paul Heckingbottom. But is that really the case? I mean, we discussed it a lot. Obviously, there weren't really many realistic runners for that job that we could see. Certainly, I'm concerned a little bit that some fans sort of swept away by the idea of Chris Coleman, because to me, international management means very little. Relative success at international level as well. I don't think it's anywhere near as intensive. I don't think it's anywhere near as difficult or challenging. I don't think it's difficult to manage at international level. I'm sure it is, certainly in a press sort of sense, but when it comes to actual selection and things like that, everything's pretty much done for you. It seems like a bit of a part-time job, and on that basis alone, I'm not saying it's nothing. Obviously, it's a heavy job with a lot of pressure, but on that basis alone, I wouldn't compare it to like a club pedigree or anything like that. So for me personally, I don't consider it to be really something that stands out on his CV. It's neither here nor there. That's a good thing, but perhaps people are a bit overwhelmed by this, whereas they shouldn't be. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree that I think that in an international job like that, with the players that Coleman had at the end, it wasn't that difficult. It's not that hard. But see, what you look at what he's done with the Wales squad and what he's done with the Wales national team, he came in 2012 and arguably the lowest ebb in their history. It was just after the death of Gary Speed.
See, the thing is, right, and this might be a slightly controversial opinion, and I don't want to upset anybody here. I'm not going to say anything too controversial, but there isn't that much to say. The reality is, though, I wonder if most of the galvanisation came from the death of Gary Speed,
That is kind of true. I mean, the players obviously really wanted to react. There was quite a large gap. There was quite a large period of time that spanned between the unfortunate death of Speed and when Wales became successful. It was a long-term thing that Coleman led them, turned them around, and eventually implemented what he believed. It wasn't just like an automatic straight reaction. But and I think that's all down to Coleman. It's the Wales were a lot of the players were devastated. A lot of them spoke about it in the past. They were absolutely devastated after the death of Speed, and it is widely held as the lowest ebb in Welsh football history. And I think they were 100th in the rankings at the time, and he's got them up to above England at one point. That it may be only an international management job, but the magnitude and the gravitas of that job just can't be underestimated for me.
Yeah, I think as well, there's definitely a different skill set. There's definitely certain things that he would have done as Wales manager that aren't entirely relevant to trying to sign a championship level goalkeeper, that aren't entirely relevant to looking across and seeing that Lee Cattermole and Darren Gibson can't run anymore. There is sort of a cut-off, but I do feel that you have to give him a lot of credit for the system he set them up in, for the way they played so well. I mean, that Belgium team, that is arguably the best team in the world that they beat in the quarterfinals. So he does deserve a lot of credit for outperforming what he should do. Okay, it's one-off games in international football. There's more variance with luck. But I think he deserves a bit more credit than what Damo's given him, essentially, that what he is doing is good. I mean, like I said, I would have preferred Heckingbottom because we know he can manage in this league. We know he can recruit players in this league. We know he can deal with losing his best players in this league. But I see a lot of positives with Chris Coleman, and I don't see any way that he's not an improvement on Grayson. So in the short term,
oh no, that wasn't something I was saying. Certainly, I'm just saying that the idea that an international manager is a boon simply because he's an international manager. I wonder if that's something that should come into account when we're considering the pedigree of our manager. Because it's like you can look at Moyes and you can look at his CV and you can look at, he was at Man U and he did this and look at what he did at Everton, and all of this is just so much bullshit, as we know. It all just comes down to what they do next, sort of thing. So
I'm actually loving having this conversation because for once we're not debating whether or not the manager we have are good or bad, but we're actually debating how successful the manager was and whether the success was just down to him. It's irrevocable that he was successful.
That's a very good point.
So
that's a very good point.
I think that's why I was so kind of pleased with the appointment. Every single manager who was linked with it, even Heckingbottom, had a few drawbacks. Paul Hurst, a person that I championed quite a lot early in the race. You had other ones like Aitor Karanka, with how controversial he is. I think Coleman, arguably, out of the realistic people that we could have got, is probably, when you weigh up all the options, it's probably the best one yet.
Yeah, certainly. That's something I subscribe to, definitely, regardless of what you might think of what I've said. Yeah, absolutely. I think he was a great appointment. not because of his international thing or anything like that, but I remember I said people were talking about his first interview. I hadn't seen it. They were talking about it in the Roker Rapport chat and saying, "Oh, I'm quite impressed. You know, he comes across as a really impressive guy and feeling a little bit optimistic." And I was just saying, "Oh well, it's so much lip service. You know, we've heard it all 1,000 times before, and they know what to say and blah blah blah." But Gav said to me, actually, he said, "I think you'll change your mind when you actually watch the interview." So I did. And I was quite surprised, taken aback to say that, yeah, I am a little bit surprised. I am a little bit impressed, to be honest, because he has a severity to him that I didn't anticipate. There's something that I didn't recognise when his name was thrown into the mix. But yeah, with him, I was quite surprised. I expected, I mean, with Grayson, we got, I recognise what I've got here. I recognise that Sunderland need to do this, and I'm going to throw in some good old-fashioned elbow grease and some good work, and you know, like that was the idea, and his attitude would get him through. His lovely attitude would get him through, and that didn't work out. Obviously, we've had a lot of people sit in that chair and speak through that mic, but the way he did, it just seems like you can't now expect him to be completely, regardless of what he said in the media, you can't expect him to be completely ignorant of the situation at Sunderland. You think by now you would have to be absolutely batshit crazy to walk into this job blind. Like, it would be absolutely insane. There's no chance that anyone could possibly take this job again without knowing what they're getting into. So you've got that. That's instantly like shouting in your mind, like, well, he surely, God, he's a sensible person. He knows, regardless of any sort of, he knows. Yeah. And on top of that, he's coming across with a kind of severity and not an aura. I won't go so far as to say an aura, but there's an aspect to him, certainly. You can see how he has charisma, not necessarily of the bouncing around the room type, bouncing around the whole stadium and getting involved with the fans directly, but more in the dressing room, quietly, confidently, spurring on his players and, you know, having the knowledge and the respect from those players for them to listen to him.
It was very cathartic, the interview, for myself. It was very nice to come in and know that it's not just how impressive and savvy he was, but he's very charismatic. I was just getting drawn in by what he was saying. It was the part about the toughness, the mental toughness and togetherness in the second half of the interview was absolutely brilliant. Winning 3-0 doesn't make mental toughness and togetherness, but it's when you're at your lowest ebb, it's when you're in your nadir that you get your mental toughness. And that was almost as if he knows that it's going to be long, it's going to be hard, it's going to be difficult to get out of this situation, but seeing that is going to bring everybody together. Instead of coming in and what Simon Grayson done, where it was just kind of these little answers that didn't quite, when you analyse it, he didn't really say anything, but at the same time said a lot. Whereas Moyes was just dour and horrendous. Coleman's been very savvy and very charismatic, and it just wants you to get behind him. It doesn't even seem like it's just club propaganda, because there's been a lot of that, especially under Grayson. Grayson's was saying the right things at first, but then once you seen what was happening on the pitch and everything else that came with it, these saying the right things just made it look like he was lying through his teeth. But I don't think he was. I think he's just an honest, genuine man who was just out of his depth and was just losing it by the end of it. And his interview last week even showed that he's not really vindictive about what happened at all. He's just kind of like apologetic, if anything. He's obviously defending his own record. He
does look like, I mean, it was easy at first to use him as the scapegoat because, in a sense, he was inevitably used like that in the end. That isn't necessarily to say that they took him on with that idea or that he signed up with that idea, but I completely agree that he was out of his depth. That isn't to say that he didn't make ridiculous mistakes, though. And the truth of the matter is that he was given a job. He was, as I said, I mean, I'm talking about Coleman saying that surely to God, you'd have to be stupid to walk into this job blind. Similarly with Grayson, I mean, it was only, 14 games or something like that, you know? He had the opportunity to understand where things were coming from. He had the opportunity to take advice from other people, and he did jump at the job. So, yes, he was out of his depth, but in truth, we can't really sympathise with him because he got given that opportunity and he squandered it. You know, other people have turned that job down and thought, I can't do that, or I can't handle, regardless of whether it's like, I can't bring Sunderland back up, or I can't work with that man, or I can't, you know, it's all relative, I suppose. So while Grayson we should have some sympathy for him for striving but failing to succeed, at the same time, I think we should still condemn him for his mistakes.
With Grayson, it's one of those where he can get another job in League One, maybe another job in the Championship. He can still be seen as a firefighter, a guy who can organise teams at a lower level. We just now know that he can't do it at a club the size of ours. So, yeah, no point losing sleep over Simon Grayson. he got his payoff. He'll be back. Whether it's in League One or the Championship, I don't know. I don't really care, but we'll move on from him. We've got a shiny new manager who's more charismatic than him, that's more talented than him, that's better looking than him. So good on you. Get on your bike, Grayson.
Yeah, definitely. I feel a bit sorry for him. Like, I can't doubt I feel sorry for him because he is such a nice guy, because he came in and it is a disaster, but he just wasn't good enough. He was never big enough. And the whole appointment itself just smacked of a little bit of short-termism, whereas this is genuine intent. It's a sign of intent for us, for the rest of the league, to say, look, we're Sunderland and we're coming back. Like, this, it might be too much. I might be getting a little bit too optimistic all too early after just a 2-1 loss. But this is the size of the gravity of the appointment of what we've just made. And
I think it's fair considering what we saw. I mean, I wasn't impressed with his substitutions. At the same time, though, I can sort of see I'm not going to look at it through the same lens that I looked at Grayson's substitutions. Like, that sort of became a recurring thing. You sort of knew after a few games that was going to be a problem. And for me, that's very important. The management of players mid-game, to me, is really, really important. It's something that you can't ignore. Something that Grayson really suffered from, I think, or his game certainly suffered from. James, you have one last thing to say?
Yeah, it's just on the interview with Coleman. I really enjoyed that he addressed the finances. It was kind of like the white elephant in the room during the whole thing. Like, I'm sitting waiting for the finances to be brought into question. And he was just so honest and open about it, where he said, look, we don't have much money. We will have to sell in the summer. We're going to have to do that to bring in players. And it's such a far cry from the Martin Bain, Simon Grayson platitude in the summer of, we haven't got the smallest budget, but we haven't got the biggest budget. It's like, it's a mid-table budget. Well, I've looked at all the budgets. I've got figures for all the the ours is the sixth smallest budget in the Championship, while making the highest net profit. Only Hull brought in more players than us, but they spent £20 million on players. That is by no means a mid-table Championship budget.
Interesting.
But it is great to see, like, Coleman's just came out and be so honest and said, look, I need to do this, because one thing that we want about Sunderland fans is that we don't want to be taken for a ride by the manager. We want to be trusted. We want to be told the truth. We don't want just all these constant platitudes that are coming in. And that's what really irked me with Simon Grayson at the end of his tenure.
It's indicative, though. It's not just indicative. It's also, it's sort of institutionalized, really, in that sense, and something that happens. I think it's difficult for them to deal with it. Fair play, hands up, it is difficult to deal with angry fans. And you can't help but be angry, considering all of the problems we've been through as fans and the constant issues with Sunderland. It has been constant. I mean, regardless of how you look at it, you can look at it on the pitch, you can look at it in the papers, you can look at it behind the scenes. It doesn't matter. It has been an uphill struggle supporting Sunderland AFC for a long time. And it should never be like that for a club, should it, really? For fans of a club, it should always be about love and pleasure and, just enjoying your time. But it isn't like that. There's a lot of stuff to complain about, and there's a lot of things to kick off about with Sunderland. It's a shame like that. But at the same time, as you say, and I agree with both of you tonight, that I feel like we've turned the corner. Don't get me wrong, the last time I felt like we turned the corner was when we beat Crystal Palace 4-0, and we all know how that panned out. But in truth, I do feel like with the appointment of Coleman, with his severity, and surely he can't be stupid. Holmes isn't here. James Holmes isn't there, but I'll say nous in his absence. With his tactical nous, surely he has the capacity to get a tune out of these players. I mean, it's a real shame, just briefly touching on injuries, really, because we haven't really spoken about it. But there were 9 out of the squad today. Obviously, a huge, huge blow, really, particularly if you're a big fan of Watmore. Jimmy, what do you make of that?
Yeah, really getting with Watmore. I mean, I really thought he was going to tear this league up. He was so impressive when he came back against Preston. He terrified them with his pace. And then you watched him again. When he won the penalty at Brentford, just sort of taking 2 players out of the game. That pace was just making him such an asset at this level. And I really thought we had one of the best forwards in the league in him. And on the other side in McGeady. And I really thought those 2 together with Graben could really fire us up this league table. I was really hopeful that Watmore was going to be a big part of whatever we did between now and the end of the season. It was going. The other thing as well is we talked about substitutions briefly. I think that was really where our lack of options hurt us. Like we talked about Honeyman not producing from a creative standpoint. There's a real lack of options and alternatives we could bring on and keep the same shape really today. There's a real lack of creative players. Ethan Robson, is he going to be good enough for this level? We don't really know yet. but the signs from what I saw of him when he came on against Cardiff are maybe not. And it was tough. I mean, the other thing as well is McManaman was so anonymous tonight. He was second guessing himself. He was taking too many touches. He didn't try and take on Neil Taylor once. He was so frustrating to watch. And the alternatives, Joel Asoro, a guy who we've all talked about is maybe his questionable attitude before, a really talented kid. But we just don't have the options off the bench that we'd really like at this stage of the season. And with Christmas coming round, with the age of our squad, you just wonder, is it going to get worse before it gets better? And that's going to be one of Coleman's big tasks, is not just instilling this belief that we're all confident he can do, not just putting in the work on the training pitch. We're all confident he can do. It's working magic in the January transfer window, and it's getting a fit 11 players on the pitch each week. So there's a lot of challenges here, and I think managing that injury list is one of the big ones.
Yeah, I definitely agree. The subs today were just indicative of the problems that we've got with the injuries and Dong's family bereavement, Rodwell's AWOL. I don't know where Rodwell was, but it was week in, week out. We're looking, there's not really, you don't really think, yes, we've got that player out and come on and change the game. We've got this player out and come on and change the game. It seems like there wasn't much. But today, Asoro's introduction kind of did change the game a little bit. Vaughan's introduction changed the game. We played just as well with the 4-4-2, Vaughan and Graben up front, as we did without. And a lot of times under Grayson, that was like, you see Vaughan coming on as much as he works hard, he kind of like, well, that's the end of the game. We're not really going to do anything. It's not going to really change from here now, is it? But Asoro's got some raw pace, and that's something that we need with Watmore's long-term injury. My big worry for Watmore is that he's had 2 ACL injuries. And although he's a good player, he's an intelligent player, he's not exactly a technically skilled player. A lot of his is raw talent. It comes from his pace. It comes from his energy, a little bit like Vardy, like that sort of style of player. His pace and energy create problems. And Asoro done that today. His pace and his energy off the ball created a few problems. Now, it was nowhere near the level of Watmore, and he's only 18, but it was just something different. And I quite enjoyed that in the second half with Asoro, even though he didn't have a particularly great game. He was just a different option. And with Watmore's injury, I think he might be important, even though I don't really rate him that highly.
Well, it's possible that he'll get that inclusion, as you say. I mean, I think we're also, if it wasn't for Watmore's injury, and considering all of the injuries, as I said, we have 9 out at the moment, or we certainly for this game, he wouldn't have gotten a look in. We've had a couple of mixed reviews about Joel Asoro, really. I suppose some people watch him and think that he's got a bit of talent. I mean, he's certainly got talent. There's no denying that. There's clear potential there. Whether or not his talent lives up to the hype, I think that's probably arguably the problem. I mean, with Watmore, to me, that isn't a bad thing. I was truly convinced that come January, we were going to lose Duncan Watmore. I think if he'd done well, we were going to lose him. I'm not saying that would have been a huge loss to us. I think it would have been in sense of potential, in the sense of he is really, as you said, as you've alluded to, James, like one of the only outlets we have on the wing. That sucks, but at the same time, would we have been looking to replace him? I mean, bearing in mind we're talking about Coleman, we haven't really touched on transfers, but let's be honest, he's going to need some money. He said in that interview that he's going to need the money from somewhere. Looking at the players we've got, who's available, who wants to go, well, probably everyone wants to go, but let's be honest, who can we actually get rid of? I mean, Duncan Watmore's got potential, you know. Lewis Graben, I think he's stuck here contractually, despite the fact that he's a high goal scorer somehow. Who are we going to sell? And Dong, who are we going to sell? Are we going to sell Kone? Yes, most likely. But I certainly expected to see the back of Watmore January, summertime. So I think the idea that he's laid up for a while, although it sucks for him, at the same time, I think if we do well in the time that he's absent, we can perhaps keep him on the books. I know this is a bit out there, it's a bit speculation and things like that, so there's nothing to back this up. I'm just wondering if we would have seen the back of Duncan Watmore to free up even like a bit of wages or something like that, you know, because he isn't such a crucial player. Obviously, he's been out for this long. Surely he isn't featured in Chris Coleman's long-term plans. I wouldn't have thought so. I think that's a bit tragic, really, when you consider it. What do you make of it, James? Like, your ideas on Watmore? Do you think I'm right here? Do you think we would miss him, or would he likely have been gone in January?
I've got a worry with Watmore that he's gone anyway. I think that if you look at players like Callum Wilson had 2 horrendous ACL injuries and came back and scored a hat-trick at the weekend for Bournemouth. But I don't think Watmore could come back and be the same player. This is the second time on the same knee. Just 2 horrendous. I mean, the first one was a horrendous ACL injury, and it looks like it's a repeat injury in the same knee of the same ligament, and that's a big worry. He might not be the same player when he comes back. Yeah. And in January, we'd definitely need to buy a player with genuine pace and physicality. I mean, physicality isn't always just brute power and strength. It's also about pace. And we've got the least physical team in a division that requires physicality to be successful. That is one of the base requirements.
Yeah, I mean, today was a real worry for me because, yeah, I agree with all your sort of reservations about Watmore and him losing it, in terms of him maybe being one of these sad stories of a player who we never really know how good he was because of injuries. A shame is the idea that we might have sold him in January. That's a bit depressing even for me. That would have just been heartbreaking. So he's on one good young English talent in January. I mean, you have to pray it's Kone. You have to pray that somebody's offering us some money for him and we can get him off our books.
We've talked about Kone before, though, haven't we? I mean, in reality, of course, someone will buy him. I mean, is it likely to be David Moyes for West Ham? Poor buggers, yeah. Kone is the sort of person or he's the sort of player, certainly, and yeah, the sort of person who thinks that that's a step up, regardless of who the manager is, regardless of what the ethics are, regardless of what the situation is, or anything like that. I think Kone is the sort of person who's going to go, yeah, I'll be better off at West Ham. I'll be better off in that stadium. I'll be better off on that contract, regardless of whether he gets enough playing time or not, or anything like that. And I think that's enough to galvanise Kone, and I think that's the problem. Football players are like that. Most footballers are like that, really. They thrive on enthusiasm, don't they? They thrive on success. Like most people, it's really difficult to get a tune. We slag off a lot of players. We slag off a lot of footballers for their non-committance, so their inability to essentially soldier on. But it takes a lot out of a person to be able to do that, to go to work at an organisation that you know is tanking, and put in your all, or to work for somebody that doesn't care about you, blah blah blah. So I've said before with Kone, it seems on the outside like he's an arsehole, but I'm sure, in truth, I'm sure there's just some, if we knew the whole story with him, if we could be a fly on the wall in his interactions with the club, I'm sure that as with a lot of footballers, she'd be sitting there going, oh, well, actually, you know what? Fuck that for a game of toy soldiers. You know what I mean? So seeing the back of him, obviously, as everyone said, and we've all watched, he's not very good anymore. I don't think it's about his actual ability, So I do wonder, with someone like Coleman in charge, I wonder if there's enough. I said, actually, before we finish, obviously we're running out of time now, but before we end this, I want to put something up to a vote between the three of us here. Or, well, just a suggestion. Let's talk about it for a minute. Like Kazri, Barini, Gilabodji. You guys are with me on this? You're following me on this? How many of those do you think would be interested / useful to us that Coleman would be able to lure? Because I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, hang on a minute, he hasn't got any money. He's perhaps got the gift of the gab. He's got a bit of confidence about him, and there have been rumours, we've spoken about on Roker Rapport, check that out, from Turkish newspapers about his position, Len's particular position at Besiktas. One newspaper over there, popular newspaper, said that he's going to leave. Perhaps they want to actually terminate his contract because he's not worth the money. Is that the sort of thing that we could expect? Jimmy, what do you reckon? Is there any chance of seeing these players back? And if we did see them under Coleman, would they improve?
The first part of your question, I think all four have played their last ever game for Sunderland Football Club, their last competitive game. I think all of them are going to be sold, and it's just a formality, really. I mean, someone said that Barini was Player of the Month for AC Milan, which is absolutely
that was
crazy.
Crazy, isn't it?
Mad.
I think that was after quite a few assists as well.
I think in terms of could they do a job in the Championship, Gilabodji, I just don't see the footballer there. I don't think he's got enough sort of in between his ears to ever really make it. He's just do you think bad
it's irrelevant? Do you think it would be relevant though for Coleman to look at the players that Sunderland have out on loan, and do you think there'd be a possibility of getting a tune out of them? Do you think there's any future for these players here?
If we're in the Championship, I think you should absolutely. Kazri would be the one you'd look at, the one who potentially he never saw eye to eye with Grayson. It may have just been a case of those two personalities not meshing. He would be the one I think would be most willing to come back in and could be effective and productive. So I think out of the four, he'd be the one that I'd sort of hang my hat on and say, if we could get him back in, he'd still only be in his mid to late 20s. That would be the one where maybe he'd be a great set piece threat. He'd be a great alternative to McGeady, a great player to play with McGeady. That would be the one that would interest me the most. But I've already sort of mentally said goodbye to all four of those guys.
Yeah, I suppose we all have, haven't we? Yeah, it's just interesting to note that considering how little money he'll have, and with the idea of just with that little rumour floating around about Lenz perhaps having his loan contract terminated, I just wonder how he'd fit in if Coleman had like a different perspective on things.
Yeah, so on the 4 loan players, I think Chilabodji I'm completely done with. Absolutely done with. He's got all right pace. He's got all right ability on the ball. He's decent in the air. But that doesn't matter when you're a centre-back. For me, a centre-back has to anticipate, concentrate, and be ready to read the game at all times, and he just can't do any of them. Kazri, Lenz and Barini, it's clear, have ability, and they would come in and improve in any position on the team. But I think there's 2 points why that'll never happen. Firstly, Chris Coleman's interview. He said that if people aren't ready to get into the fight and aren't ready to give everything, he doesn't want them. He said he doesn't want anybody who's half-assed. He can either be here in full or be here, or just be gone completely and be a bit taken away from the club. And I think all of them have been questionable in the past regarding that. And secondly, I think it's for future money. I think maybe we couldn't sell them on this year because of a lack of interest. But partly, I think that they didn't sell them on because it guarantees transfer fees in the next window. It guarantees another set of income away from just the 30 million from Pickford, because I don't think we've got another 30 million in Pickford in the summer.
I don't think we got 30 million in the first place, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we've got a big sum like that from anybody. So even if it's just nominal fees, even if it's very small ones, it guarantees another set of income for us to try and get the club back on its feet financially.
Absolutely. Very good point. Well made. Well, that's about all we've got time for, guys. Thank you very much for joining us for the 50th episode of the Roker Rapport. Sorry there weren't more fireworks or anything like that. Don't forget you can subscribe to us on Acast, iTunes and YouTube. And, of course, you should go on to rokerreport.com to check out all the wonderful stuff that's written by the fantastic writers we have there and contributors. Don't forget you can also contribute yourself. Always delighted to hear from you. Until the 51st episode, that's it from the Roker Rapport. This is us signing off.